It's time to spill the beans with your host, Beans. Welcome to my podcast.
Hey guys, welcome in. My name is Beans. Welcome back to my podcast, Spill the Beans. Today we are going to be talking about inner child healing and trauma work, right? What is inner child healing? Let's start with that. So inner child healing is basically the idea that you have an inner child, right? And your inner child is the creative, authentic, carefree part of yourself that's very spontaneous. It's not afraid to take risk. It's just out there living its la vida loca, right? It's just having the time of its life, right? And what it is that the pains, the hurts, the traumas, the neglect that we feel in our childhood basically tears away at our inner child, right? It suppresses it, it rejects it, and it causes it to be hurt and wounded, you know? So then we're unable to form healthy, strong relationships in our current day, in our current life, right? And so what this is it's working with our inner child to heal it, to make it be more secure, to give it the love and support that it needs. So that way we are able to do the things that we want today, establish healthy relationships, able to stand up for ourselves, able to gain a little bit of independence, those types of things, okay? What I will like to say about inner child work and shadow work is this is trauma work, right? It's working to dig up your traumas, bring it to the surface, so that way you can work through it, right? And the goal of this is you do this at a point in time when you're a lot more stable, because what it is it's pushing our inner child self deep down into the dark place, hiding parts of ourselves, it's repressing parts of ourselves, right? Because it's a coping mechanism, right? It's how we coped, because back then we didn't feel safe enough, we didn't feel secure enough, we didn't know what to do to handle these big emotions, to deal with this pain, right? And so in a response to that, we pushed it away. So this is supposed to be done at a point in time when you're a little bit more stable, you're a little bit more secure, you have support, you have people around you who can help you, so that way you can redig up these traumas and work on them. So that way they don't affect your life so much. Because the moment you push something deep down into the dark place, it will come out in negative ways, which is why some of the ways that you need some inner child work healing or some shadow work done is if you're easily frustrated, if you have big reactions to small things, if you have commitment issues, abandonment issues, low self-esteem, over independence, right? Having trouble setting boundaries. All of these things can be good indicators of, hey, there's something wrong with your inner child, right? Your shadow self needs a little bit of work. Let's do some trauma work. But if these emotions are too big, if it's really hard, if doing this trauma work feels re-traumatizing, that's a good indication to stop. That's a good indication to be like, let me take a pause, let me take a moment, and then go seek out professional help, because it's trauma, right? Sometimes you need someone to help you work through things. You need someone who's a licensed professional to be like, okay, and here's the best way we can handle this situation. So if it gets too much, if it gets too hard, stop. Go seek out professional help, okay? But number one, I think we could all benefit from trauma work, but also just therapy in general. I'm a big advocate for therapy, right? Because I feel like it's dang near impossible to grow up in America or society today without trauma, right? With the way capitalism is, with the way that we treat minorities, with the way that sexism is, like, it's just really hard to grow up without experiencing some type of trauma, So I think everyone, no matter who you are, could benefit from therapy, from trauma work, which is why I push for it a little bit. But I also understand that it's trauma, right? It's grueling, and not everyone can do these types of things by themselves. Not everyone's in a position where it's safe for them to do this type of trauma work, right? So that's why one of the first things that I said is, number one, If you need help, go seek help. Number two, if you're not in a safe environment where you're able to be vulnerable, put it off, because your safety is the most important thing when you're doing this, okay? Some ways that you can do this inner child work is, number one, nurture yourself. Give yourself self-love, because that is so important. A lot of times when we grow up in childhood, we grew up with parents who were neglectful, where they gave us all of our physical needs, but didn't show us an ounce of love. They didn't really support us. They didn't really feel like they cared about us, And so being the support system that you needed back then, showing yourself the love and kindness that you deserve, can be a great help. What's also important when doing inner child healing and shadow work, being compassionate to yourself, right? There are going to be a lot of moments when, number one, you're just going to want to make fun of yourself. You're just going to want to be mean to yourself. And so you have to address yourself with compassion. You got to be like, listen, it's okay. It's almost like reparenting yourself, which is one of the techniques that you can do. But in that reparenting, you want to be a lot kinder. You want to be understanding. You want to be like, I'm here for you. I'm validating you, right? Validate your emotions, validate your feelings. Be like, okay, you're allowed to feel this way. You're allowed to feel sad, right? There are a lot of people, especially men, right, where they're not allowed to cry because of society. Because society is like, you can't do that. That's bad. That's not what you're supposed to do. And so instead of being sad, instead of crying, they get angry and they lash out, which is why so many men have anger issues, right? So that's also part of inner child work, but it's super important to confront yourself with compassion. Compassion first. What's also really good is setting boundaries. It's incredibly important to learn how to set boundaries. And when you first start learning how to set boundaries, can be extremely hard, right? Because you're like, I don't know how to set boundaries. And then you have to be like, okay, I set a boundary. Now I have to enforce that boundary. Now I have to keep it, right? So that in itself can also be a task. So another thing that can be a part of inner child healing is meeting the needs that you needed when you were a child, right? Like, let's say you didn't have a roof overhead, providing yourself with some sort of stability could be that for you now. Let's say you didn't have that love and support that you needed. Giving yourself the love and support that you needed now could be incredibly beneficial. So just giving yourself the needs now that you needed then. Very helpful. There's also reimagining, where you imagine one of the traumatic scenarios that you had, right? That you had as a kid. And you also imagine yourself currently in that scenario, giving you whatever you needed, being like, okay, this is what I needed in that moment and it would have helped me. And it helps to heal some of that trauma. It helps to give yourself a little bit of comfort and guidance in those moments. But like I said, this is trauma work. Sometimes that can be very traumatizing. Going back to something that hurt you, going back to something that traumatized you can be a lot. It can be triggering. Another great thing that is amazing to do for inner child work healing is playing. Like simply just doing things that your kid self would do. Go playing at a park, go swinging on a swing, go rolling around in the grass, go running around in the rain, just letting your kid self out a little bit, playing on a skateboard, go roller skating, that is so healing for your inner child self. You have no idea. Some of the small things that I do for my inner child is I eat dino nuggies, right? I'm like, you know what would make my inner child self happy today? Eating dino nuggies, drinking a Capri Sun, eating some ice cream. And that's what I do to make sure that my inner child is happy and healthy. So it could be something so simple as that, right? It doesn't have to be some elaborate thing where it's like, let's go skydiving or something. It can be like, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to go eat me a little icy pop, because why not? Another really good thing for inner child work healing is doing some of the things, like, yes, playing, but doing other things that you did as kids, right? So watching some of the TV shows that brought you comfort as a kid. If you collected things, collecting those things as a kid. If you used to enjoy reading, right? Sometimes as a kid, we really enjoy reading. And then for no good reason, the school just like beats that out of us, right? Where it's like reading is boring, reading is not fun, and we just grow out of it. But doing the things that made us happy as kids can be incredibly healing also, you know? So those are just a couple of the things that really help with inner child work. And then shadow work is actually a type of inner work, right? It works with your shadow. Your shadow self is basically the parts that you have neglected, rejected, hid away, pushed deep down inside, um, because you're ashamed of them, right? Because society is like, you can't be that person. You can't do those things, right? Or as a trauma response, right? There's some times where it was like, okay, when you cried as a kid, every time you cried, you got beat, right? So then you learned it's not okay for me to cry. Crying is not okay for me to do. So now you're unable to cry, okay? Or in school, when you tried to act yourself, when you tried to be who you were, you got bullied. So you learned it wasn't okay for you to be yourself. You learned it wasn't okay for you to do the things that made you happy. And so you repressed it. You pushed it deep down inside, and there it goes in the shadow, right? What also lives in our shadow self is our pain, our hurt, our traumas, right? The painful experiences that we don't want to think about or hear about also lives there, which is why doing shadow work sometimes can be traumatic and you need help sometimes. But yeah, shadow work is the idea of bringing up the shadow self, right? And integrating it into your daily life because there are good parts in your shadow self, right? Your true authentic self, the part of you that's creative, that's spontaneous, that wants to take those risks, that also lives in your shadow self. So it's like, let's bring this up. Let's gain our creativity back. Let's gain our confidence back and bring it out into our everyday life, right? And then when you bring that pain and hurt up, you're able to work through it. You're able to deal with it. So that way it no longer affects you. So that way it no longer causes you to continuously self-sabotage. So that way you're not stuck in the same cycles that you've been in for forever. And this is why I'm such a fan of inner child work and shadow work healing because it's just so great. It's just so beneficial. And I don't think I'll ever have a day when I'm like, you know what's bad for you? These two things. But anyways, that is all I have to say about that. Also, on a side note here, I have created a inner child work healing workbook. It's a 30-day workbook. It's on my Etsy. If you're interested in that, there are some really nice, good prompts for it. You could check it out. Other than that, let's move on to our next topic. Side story here before we get into our next topic actually is once upon a time when I was in the dating scenes, I dated a girl who, number one, was in therapy. Love that. That was great. And she had like a deal breaker, and her deal breaker was if you weren't open to the idea of going to therapy, you know, um, she was like, yeah, no, this isn't going to work out. I'm walking away. And I thought that was such a great thing, right? I was like, yeah, no, everyone should go to therapy. Everyone needs a little bit of therapy, you know? I feel like being completely closed off to the idea of going to therapy is a little insane. That's just a little fun fact that I wanted to share with you guys today. Anyways, on to our next topic, which is basically spirituality then versus now. And the thing that I think is very interesting about this is like back in the early 2000s, right? When spirituality, I feel like, became a huge, huge thing. A lot of the spiritual, first of all, there were no resources, right? Like it was super hard to find resources. And the only resources that you could find were on Wicca. Like it was like, okay, we're going to be Wiccan. We're going to start a coven, those types of things. And so those became the only resources for people out there, you know? It was like if you wanted to learn about witchcraft or spirituality, those were the only informations you had to look at. And if you didn't resonate with that, because that doesn't resonate for a lot of people actually, you were kind of like shit out of luck. You know, you had to like figure things out your own way. If you didn't grow up in a household where it's like, oh yeah, my family's spiritual, we have our own practice, you knew nothing, right? You had 0.0 resources and nowhere to really start at. And I feel like now there are a lot more resources, right? We're a lot more open to the idea that Wicca isn't the only thing out there, right? We don't need all of that. There are a multitude of different practices. Back in 2020, when they were like, okay, what kind of witch are you? We have green witch, we have eclectic witches, we have kitchen witches, we have herbal witches, like we have crystal witches. There are so many different types of things that you can be now. And we have more resources for those things. We have more information out there. We have information on what crystals do, what herbs do, um, spells that people can do. There's a lot more information and it's more easily accessible. And I love that because we don't have to go through the struggle of trying to a lot of people, the moment that things get hard where it's like, I can't find any resources, they stop, right? And now that there are more resources available, people have the ability to find something that they really connect with, that they really enjoy, that they really resonate with. And that is something that I love, right? Is that there are more resources available to us. I think we all kind of dislike is when I feel like this happens whenever anything gets popular, right? Like this happened back in the early 2000s when it became popular. Then it happened back in 2020 when it got popular again. Is people will just use this for clout. They'll be like, okay, this is all the rave right now. Let me just do what I can to make some money off of it. Let me just do what I can to be big about this. Let me make an appearance so that way people can associate me with this thing and I can gain followers, you know? And I don't really like that, right? I don't think it's very genuine. I don't think it's very authentic of people to do that. It's going to happen regardless of what you do. Like, it's just what people do. It's just something that happens in our society. People see something that's trending and they're like, I'm going to use this for clout. I'm going to do this also, right? The only thing that I like about this is because people are like, oh, let me follow the mainstream thing. Let me just do what everyone else is doing because why not? Is people can accidentally fall into something that they really enjoy. Even if they only really enjoy it for I only got into this for like a month or two. It can still help them. It can still allow them to grow, to connect with themselves, to trust their intuition. So at the end of the day, regardless of if it was just for clout, of if it was just because they're following the mainstream thing, they're still learning. They're still growing. It's still helping them out. It doesn't stop helping them out just because they didn't do it for all of the correct reasons. So that is my spiel about that. I also feel like back before it became popular again in 2020 is that there were a lot of hard rules that people had to follow, right? And again, that's a Wicca thing, like being in a coven, all of those things, they had rules. It was like the threefold law. You can't do this, you can't do that. And there was this idea because of that, you aren't a true witch if you don't do this, which is not accurate, right? It's not accurate. Just because that's a part of your coven or your belief doesn't mean it's true for everyone. Because like I said, there's just so many different types of witches out there, right? And spirituality, witchcraft is so unique. There are so many different ways to do anything there's no one right way to do anything, you know? There's a multitude of ways to do everything, manifestation, spell work. It's just all up to your imagination. And that's one of the things that I love about witchcraft. So there was that idea where it was like, okay, you have to do this or else you're not really a witch. And I feel like we saw that kind of heighten back in 2020. And then slowly as time went on, we all started to learn hey, this actually isn't correct. We became a lot more open to the idea of we can be different. My practice doesn't have to look like your practice, and your practice doesn't have to look like their practice. These things can be different. They can be unique, They don't all have to be the same. And I feel like we slowly began being more comfortable with that idea. And I think now we are a lot more comfortable with that. I feel like most people in the witchcraft scene, they're like, no, I get it. No one's practice is really going to look the same unless you're in a coven. And even that is going to have some differences. Even that's going to be a little okay, I'm not doing exactly what you're doing, And I love that. I love how we're just a little bit more accepting. I love how we're just a little bit more open, um, and willing to accept things. Anyways, that's all I really had to say about everything for this podcast. Normally, now would be the time for me to answer some questions, just get into it. But no one left any questions on the last video. No one left any questions on the last podcast. So we have no questions. What I will do though is I will share a story about some of the strangest experiences that I've had in my witchcraft experience, right? Number one, this is a little bit more recently, but one time I was on live doing my thing, doing my spiel, doing my readings, right? And someone comes in and they just randomly tell me, hey, I like your energy. And I get that quite often. So I'm like, thanks, appreciate it. No problem, Bob. And then they go, I'm stealing it. I'm taking your energy. And I was like, what? Wait a minute, what? The way to just come in here and be like, I'm stealing your energy. If that isn't an energy vampire at its finest, it's just crazy. But I don't think what they didn't understand is, number one, when I go live, I have a lot of energy normally, right? And I set aside a lot of that energy just to give to the people in my life, just to be like, okay, and this energy right here is for the live, right? Like to just waste on the live. So that, take it. It's for the taking. I wasn't trying to be greedy with it regardless. Number two, I have protections up, right? And my spirit guides, my ancestors, they don't be playing no games. They aren't about that. But I just thought that was so funny. I just thought that was so absolutely hilarious. And it cracked me up inside. These next two, these are just things that I thought of or things that I heard of that I thought were crazy. And one of them is doing spells in Sim, like using Sims to do spells. And I thought that was crazy. I thought that was insane. I was like, what a crazy idea. How fun, how interesting. And if I played Sims, I would probably try that, right? The other thing is using your own urine, right, to get rid of a hex or a curse. And that is mind blowing to me. Just what? What are we doing here? I was like, what? But I hear it works. I hear it like it's really good for doing those types of things. And that has me a little bit scared. That has me a little bit like, I don't know about all of this. Will I ever try that? No. I don't see me ever being like, you know what, let me just do it. But the creativity, 10 out of 10, right? Like, sure, it's gonna work. It's your own bodily fluids, okay? Crazy. Another interesting thing, this happened when I was a kid actually. So once upon a time, I used to stay in a room with my brother, right? And the way this happened is, imagine this little room. My bed is on this side, up against the wall. My brother's bed is on this side, up against the wall. And on my side, there are posters on the wall, high up, right? And they're all taped up there with, the yellow pink tape that you see for breast cancer awareness, right? They're all taped up there with that because that's the only tape we had. And one night we go to sleep and we wake up and all of the posters on my side, because I think there were some on my brother's side too, were torn down, crumbled in a ball, thrown in the middle of the floor, right? In between both of our beds. And I didn't get up and do anything. And my brother didn't get up and do anything, right? Like, there's no history of me sleepwalking. There's no history of him sleepwalking. And what's even more interesting is, in order to get to these posters, you would have to stand up on my bed to tear these posters down. To this day, we still don't know how those posters came down. We just decided that obviously something didn't like those posters. They were like, we hate these posters. And we never put those back up, right? That was a fun little experience for us. We were scared out of our minds for like the next week or two. And I would constantly wake back up and I would wake up and be like looking around like, anyone in here? So that was a fun little story. That was interesting to say the least. But Right. That concludes the podcast for today, for this week. Like I said, leave comments, leave questions, anything that you would like to hear me talk about, I would enjoy. Other than that, I hope you guys have a beautiful, amazing rest of your day. Bye, guys.